Will you eat the bugs? It seems like every day there's a new news article in magazines, on the internet, on television about this new tasty way to eat insects. And I don't remember there didn't used to be this many articles about this and this much hoopla. But currently, every day you're going to see a new article about eating insects of some type. And so I've invited one of my good friends on. So we're going to talk about entomophagy, which is eating bugs. And we're going to kind of dig into this deeply. And I really am excited to get your feedback on this as a watcher of this video. I want to know what you think about all this in the comments. And I'm going to be asking questions through this video. And then at the end of this video, after we've discussed the science, both practical and theoretical, we're going to kind of wrap up what our take on this is. And whether you're keto, carnivore, ketovore, low carb, or you're eating the ADA diet, this is probably going to be a pretty interesting video. So you might want to stick around. Okay, let's bring Nick on. This is Nick Norwitz. He is a PhD, and he's currently in his third year of medical school. Is that right?
Second. They make the clerkship earlier now.
Ah, gotcha. Okay, when I was in med school, you didn't do clerkships till third year, but he's getting started early.
Harvard's weird. But
gotcha.
Yeah.
So he's in medical school at Harvard. I was going to say that, but since he did, I'll say it. I didn't know if he wanted to stay under the radar or not. Hey, thank you, Holly Crazy, for the super sticker. So bugs, Nick Norwitz. When you bring up the topic of eating bugs, it seems that a lot of people become immediately emotional. And you know as well as I do, anytime something makes you emotional, that makes you much less logical. And so we're going to try to remain logical and rational and practical in this video. And Nick wants to start out with kind of giving you his overall take on this and what he's not saying and what he also is saying.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Ken, with the emotionality aspect. What I see, and this is my perspective in social media with respect to bugs, particularly within the low carb and the carnivore communities, is a lot of engagement and a lot of feedback around this topic, because emotionality gets engagement, gets clicks, retweets, and so that there's incentive to talk about this issue generally in a negative light. And there's also, I think, an emotional reaction because there's the perception, which may be true, that the cultural elites, which are trying to force people to eat bugs and replace meat. So there's this equivalency of eat the bugs with meat is bad. And what I want to clarify here in terms of my position was I'm not trying to take your meat away. I have meatballs for dinner. Meat, I also don't think is bad. It's an extremely good health food, I would argue. But that doesn't mean that entomophagy also doesn't have its benefits. And so to talk about it from a nutritional perspective, an economics and sustainability perspective, there's some really interesting things one could consider. And then from a cultural perspective, like, are bugs intrinsically negative, or is it just our vantage point? Most cultures around the world eat bugs, and even those with access to meat. And for me personally, I've actually, before I was into metabolic health or anything, really enjoyed just trying exotic things, including entomophagy, because I love to travel. And it was always a great way for me to reach out to another culture to try their cuisine, whatever that may be. Sometimes, like in China, it was, fried tarantula. And that was really fun to sit with someone. I didn't really know their language, but to see their face light up when I tried their food and actually enjoy it, kind of tastes like deep fried crab. Like that was kind of fun for me. So I'm not trying to force you to eat bugs. I'm not trying to take away your meat, but I do think entomophagy needs to be talked about with a little bit more scientific base, so we don't just shit on it for no reason.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I want to ask everybody watching this, have you ever eaten a bug on purpose? I'm not talking about when you're riding your bike or motorcycle. I'm talking about on purpose, put some sort of creepy crawly thing in your mouth and ate it. Not accidentally. Have you? Yes or no? Tell me in the comments. I was doing a little research on this topic, Nick. In entomophagy, according to Webster.com, the first time it was ever used in a sentence in written form was 1975. Before that, the word, and it sounds like a really nice Greek word. You would think entomophagy, that you would just think that's been around for a long time. And then also, when I did a PubMed search of that term, I got this, and the first reference was in 2012. Before 2010 or 2012, there's not a single mention of entomophagy in the medical nutrition literature, which I found that kind of weird. I figured this is something that surely had been talked about before, using that very sexy word.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's been part of cultures for thousands of years, and there are thousands of insects people eat. So if it's just taken as a default, you don't really need a term to describe it. And as people are commenting with whether or not they've eaten an insect, I was also doing some research today. By the way, I do not pretend to be like an expert on this topic. It's something I found interesting at some time. But the FDA, do you know what the FDA's regulation for insect fragments in peanut butter and chocolate is?
Oh, there's a definite allowed percentage. I don't know what
30
it is.
fragments per 100 grams, which is up to 3.5 ounces per 100 grams.
So what you're saying, Nick Norwitz, is that we've all eaten bugs, whether we meant to or not. It's bugs in the peanut butter, bugs in the cornflakes. Probably the only thing you haven't gotten a bug fragment in is a ribeye or ground beef or something like that. But if you've eaten any kind of processed plant food, you've definitely eaten bug parts before. Now, let's also, one thing that I think somebody, a commenter, had alluded to several decades ago, maybe a century ago, lobster and crab was considered a poverty food. Like it was a punishment food. Like that's literally what you would feed slaves and prisoners. It was nobody with any good heel on their shoe whatsoever would ever lower themselves to eat a lobster or a crab. And now it's considered a delicacy by most people in most cultures. Could something like that happen with insects?
I think 100%. I mean, it's already kind of happening with particular insects in particular parts of the world. But this is all just cultural framing. When we put up the question, like, would you eat bugs? A couple days ago when we were announcing we were doing this, I got a lot of comments saying that, like, all cultures that have access to meat would always choose meat over bugs. And that's just factually incorrect. There are a lot of cultures with lots of access to meat who are like, they consider mapone worms or fried tarantula a delicacy. It just is. And honestly, if you've ever tried it and you don't have the preconceived notion of this is going to be gross, they kind of just taste like their analogous U.S. ethnocentric counterparts. A fried tarantula tastes kind of like crab, you know? Yeah. It just does. So there's nothing intrinsic to it.
It makes sense.
Yeah, they're both arachnids.
I don't know if I could eat a tarantula, Nick. I don't know. Maybe probably some cricket powder, probably a mealworm, like roasted mealworms. I could probably do that. But a tarantula, man, I don't know. Could any of you guys eat a tarantula? Could you do that? I mean, maybe for $20. I used to have a guy I went to high school with. His name was Jesse Moon. And he would eat a grasshopper for $10. And so we would go out and find the most ginormous grasshopper we could find. And we would all throw our dollars together. And when we got $10, Jesse Moon would pull the back legs off the grasshopper. And he would swallow the grasshopper whole and take our money. And I was in awe of him, also grossed out by that. But the reality is that over 2 billion people on the planet right now consume some degree of insects, bugs in their diet on purpose. 3,000 different ethnic groups, and they consume, 2,100 different types of edible insects. So this is not something that's completely new to humanity. This is something that many people in many cultures, it's normal. Now, they might I'm not saying they're choosing bugs over meat. I'm saying that it's maybe part of their culture, part of their heritage. This is a meal that my grandmother made me. Therefore, I enjoy it as well. And I'm going to give it to Nick since he's over here right now. We'll see what his face looks like when he eats it. But this is not a new thing. This has been going on since the dawn of humanity. Somebody commented that John the Baptist lived on locusts and honey in the Bible. It's absolutely true. From my research, I found out that locusts, grasshoppers, and crickets are kosher. And that locusts, bees, ants, lice, and termites are halal.
And I have this quote by Aristotle: the larva of the cicada, on attaining full size in the ground, becomes a nymph. It tastes the best before the husk is broken. So Aristotle was eating larva and
yes. And now make no mistake, neither Nick nor I are want to make you eat bugs. We're not even suggesting that you do eat bugs. We're trying to talk about this and separate it from the ick factor, separate it from the emotion, separate it from the culture and heritage, and just say, let's look at insects as a food source. Is it nutritional? Is it harmful? Is the nutrition in the bugs? Is it bioavailable? That's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Mm-hmm. I think you made a good analogy just now with respect to religion. I mean, me forcing people to eat bugs, like I have the same perspective of that as me forcing somebody who's Jewish to eat pork. I'm like, it's just part of your culture, your mindset, your psychology. For whatever reason, like you don't need to eat anything. I'm not going to force anybody to eat anything. But that's separate from should it be an available food source and normalized?
Yeah.
Based on the nutritional properties and the sustainability topic.
And I was really shocked that there's not a lot of research about the nutrition of the different insects. I was expecting a lot of research because it's so common in other countries and other cultures, but it's not on PubMed if it exists. So let's talk about, first of all, the nutrition. In the studies we do have, what is the nutrition content of the average bug? Are they a good source of protein, vitamins, minerals, etc.?
So in terms of protein content, like crude protein, on par with beef for protein concentration. You take a cricket or a mealworm or beef, about 20 grams per 100 gram, and generally full amino acid spectrum, including all the essential amino acids. It varies with bug species just because it's such a broad population.
Sure.
But the protein is generally plentiful, high quality, and bioavailable. If you actually look at the bioavailability, there are various studies, and the data do differ paper to paper, but generally it's on par with beef. Some saying even better than like casein. I found this one paper I'll quote from: the biological value of protein, which is an indication of how well the protein is utilized by the organism, is superior for cricket, moth, and grasshopper at 86 to 93%, as opposed to casein at 74. Again, not saying that this is better than casein or other animal proteins, just saying generally there's an equivalency in terms of protein as a first topic.
Yes, absolutely. And we have examples in the animal kingdom. Our least distant relative, the chimpanzee, still has, I think, all 3 copies of the chia gene, so that they can. And so there's a cellulose-like component of the hard shells of insects called chitin. And there's a big question is, oh, well, wait a minute, chitin. I thought that was an allergen. I thought that killed people. I don't think we can digest it. You want to jump into the chitin controversy?
Sure. So chitin is an insoluble fiber. It makes up the exoskeletons of insects. And some people say we can't digest it. I think that it's like all primate at least one paralog of the chia gene, so can produce some chitinase. I don't know if everybody does. Sparse for me, but I did also find other literature showing that chitin digesting enzymes can be made by our gut microbiota, and it tends to be higher in cultures that eat bugs, which makes sense. You're kind of like adapting to what you're eating, so it probably could be something that's trained. But all that aside, let's say that even if we couldn't digest it, would it be bad for us? Well, no. It's an insoluble fiber. It's like saying the cellulose in celery is toxic. I'm not saying celery is the best food in the world, but is the cellulose in its cell wall, is it toxic? No. And actually, it might have prebiotic properties. There was another paper showing that based on how it affects the microbiome, it can lower levels of salmonella, Vibrio cholera, and E. coli. So could it have some downsides in some people, like any fiber causing, I don't know, gastrointestinal distress in some people with sensitive GI systems? Maybe. But again, it's not like very clear, and it might even have beneficial components.
Yes. And in the little amount of research I did on this topic before this, I found one study where I think they tested 20 people for chitin or for chitinase, which is the enzyme that breaks down chitin. And they found that 16 people had it. And they didn't find any in the other people. And so there's several things at play there. First of all, the chitinase is only active in a very acidic stomach. So if someone's taking a proton pump inhibitor, their chitinase is not going to be active and therefore not detectable. So if you're on a proton pump inhibitor, don't eat the bugs, because you're definitely not going to be able to break down the chitin. but it looks like that most humans have at least one copy of the chia gene. And maybe not everybody though. So bugs may not be for everybody, and that's okay.
But in those 4 people who didn't express the chitinase enzyme, did they have side effects? Did they actually have any gastrointestinal problems? Because
and I don't even know.
They just get pooped out.
I don't think they even fed them bugs. I think they just tested them for chitinase to see if they produced it in their stomach.
Yeah. So just another, just to reinforce the point, even if you couldn't digest it, it's not necessarily a problem.
Yeah. And just to be clear for everybody watching, chitin that would be on the little hard shell of a beetle or a worm or a cricket, that little hard crunchy bit, right? That's the same exact thing that is the shell of a shrimp or the shell of a lobster or the shell of a crab. It's literally chitin. That is the same thing. Lobsters, crab, and shrimp are just distant relatives of insects that decided to go back into the water at some point where the terrestrial beetles and such stayed on the land. But it's made of exactly the same thing. And I think for a lot of people who have a seafood allergy, which is a real thing, a lot of them think it's iodine allergy, which is impossible. It cannot be that. But I think it may be a chitin allergy for some people. They just have an allergic reaction. We have chitin receptors in our guts, and we also have chitin receptors in our lung tissue. And so there's actually a couple of case reports of people working in a seafood factory where the lobsters get chopped up and stuff, of having a lung reaction to the chitin as a employment risk. And they had a reaction, had to go to hospital. And so there are definitely some people who cannot even be around chitinaceous arthropods, or they will have an allergic reaction.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same with any food product. You can have an intolerance. It's not necessarily intrinsically bad to the food product. I don't know if your listeners know, you can be allergic to meat. Get bitten by the Lone Star tick, you have alpha-gal intolerance. It's not an IgE-mediated reaction, but you basically become meat allergic, which would suck. Yeah. But any food you could be intolerant of.
So Thurston Hal, before you boycott this channel, neither Nick nor I are advocating eating bugs. We are not recommending eating bugs. We're just having a conversation about evidently a very popular topic in the media today, so that you can kind of, when you hear these articles, you can have an informed opinion about what they're saying and decide whether you want to do that or not. We're not trying to trick you, Thurston Hal the bird. Love the handle, by the way. So we talked about that. So I think let's talk about our vegan brothers and sisters.
Can I just ask you quickly before we go on from nutrients? Yes. Were you kind of surprised at the micronutrient profile of insects? Because I was. I thought it was pretty impressive.
Oh, it's very impressive, absolutely. And then that we can go from there. But when you look at the available nutrition in insects, it is impressive looking. You're like, damn, they got a lot of good stuff in them. But then the question becomes, how bioavailable is that?
I was surprised to know that crickets have 2.5 times as iron as beef.
Yes, absolutely. What's that?
So I found there are a few studies suggesting just equivalence in bioavailability in general, post-cooking generally. Sometimes boiling or roasting will increase the bioavailability, but it's the same with anything. Eating raw meat's less bioavailable. Yes. But the iron, the manganese, the zinc, which are all very rich in insects, copper, actually was pretty bioavailable. And even if your listeners aren't going to eat it, if you think about that as a scalable food product for people with undernutrition, which includes a lot of the world, it's a pretty great option.
Yeah. And I think as a fallback food, as a poverty food, as a starvation food, it's way the hell better than giving them cream of wheat. If you're actually wanting to reverse the malnutrition and the kwashiorkor and the cachexia that we see in less developed nations, dude, insects are the way to go for these people, at least temporarily, until they can do better, especially while they can't do better. What about our vegan friends? I totally get that they don't want to eat anything with a face that has a mother, that the mother nursed it, that it may feel fear and it may feel apprehension and it may feel sadness. I get that. I don't agree with it, but I get their argument. Okay. So insects, so the where emotions come from in mammals is the neocortex, which is the newest part of the brain. That's why we have emotions, is we have a neocortex. No insect has a neocortex. So by definition, they cannot feel fear. They cannot fear loss. They cannot feel any of these emotions that we feel, and that maybe perhaps some other mammals feel. They cannot feel that at all. And so for many of our vegan friends, our vegan brothers and sisters who are obviously not getting the nutrition that they need to, I think for them, the entomophagy would be a viable option for them, because they're still not really breaking any ethical or moral rule, because they're not eating a sentient animal. But they're basically, like you said earlier, if you're eating mealworms or crickets, you're basically getting the nutrition that's in beef, but you're not eating a cow.
That's true.
What
And
do
I
you
would
think?
also argue that it's probably, if you're then relying on that for your nutrition rather than like monocrop agriculture, you then don't need to like kill all the little critters that are living in the agricultural space or spray the area with pesticides. Pesticides is actually an interesting topic because, okay, well, one could argue, yes, if you're going to eat locusts, maybe they inhibit pesticides. If you're eating the pests, there is a lower need for the pesticides. So you can actually remove toxins or the need from toxins from the environment and save all the little critters from the byfall of the spray.
Yep. And so let me ask all the listeners, if we all went over to Nick's house and he fried up some succulent, fill in the blank, mealworms, crickets, whatever, tarantula, but I mean, it was guaranteed that it was going to be tasty, would you try it? Yes or no? Tell me in the comments. Would you try a little bite? Would you just eat it to be sociable? Or would you be like, hell no to the bugs? How would you act at Nick Norwitz's house, keeping in mind that his mother's probably watching in the background? How would you behave? Yes or no?
It's fine. I'm prepared to lose like 2,000 followers on this video.
Sometimes talking about science is not popular, but insects do contain all of the essential amino acids. They're full of many, many vitamins and minerals, and in many cases, more so than foods that we would consider to be kind of nutrient dense. But the ick factor, man, for so many people, it's the ick factor. And let's talk about the ick factor, because that's a biological thing. That's not and it's a biological thing, and it's a social thing. And so if you read Dawkins enough, you start to realize that social things are really just biological things, right? It all comes from biology. And so I raise sheep, and we've got new lambs in the pasture right now that were just born in the 20 below weather. Every time the ewe goes to eat, her lamb is right there beside her, watching everything that she eats. And there's actually research in agriculture literature that you can, like if cows won't eat a certain weed, you can train them to eat it by letting them watch other cows eat it and then mixing it in with their food. Then they're like, oh no, that's good. I like that. This same thing is exactly true for humans as well. But if I grew up and I never saw my mother eat a bug, and I never saw my grandmother eat a bug, that's where the ick factor comes from, because it's not part of my culture. It's not part of my heritage. Therefore, to me, it's a repulsive thing because I've never seen any of the people that I grew up trusting do that. Dig into that. But that all goes back to the biology, Nick.
But I think it does come down to a little bit to individual framing. Like for me, I spoke to earlier, I really find it exciting to try foods I've never seen people eat, because I see it as a challenge and something new and exciting. And I also think individuals listening could reframe it in that way as well. So like imagine you're on the show Fear Factor, right? And often they would have people sit in a tub of bugs or eat bugs. You know, for the hyper masculine among us, like there's that aspect of being like, this is ballsy, I'm going to do it. I can jump out of planes, I can shark dive, things I've done, and I can eat bugs. Versus, given the charge and the perspective of people think, oh, the elites are trying to force us to eat bugs, the perception then becomes one of submission. So you can reframe it as I'm being ballsy and adventurous, or I'm being submissive. But how you choose to do that is completely up to you. And just as a funny aside, you mentioned Dawkins, which is ironic given we're talking about social media. You know, he coined the word meme.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
and so Dawkins would say that having the ick factor to eating bugs, that is a meme that you learned from the people who raised you, whoever those people happen to be. And that's just a replicative meme that you're now basing your adult decisions on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, guys, we're not advocating eating bugs. We're not telling you must eat bugs. We're not saying that eating bugs is good or healthy or anything else. We're just talking about the science that we were able to dig up about this.
I think we're kind of saying eating bugs can be healthy.
Yeah, well, and I think so. And like I said earlier, I think it's a great. And so for me, bugs are never going to be my primary food. That's never going to happen. I can just tell you that. But
That's fine.
I raise quail because I love the eggs. And I'm just like Kathleen. I'm going to feed the bugs to my chickens and quail and then eat the eggs. That's what I'm going to do. But I raise mealworms in the quail hutch to feed to the chickens and the quail, right? But in a survival situation, in a shit hit the fan, oh my God, all of the trucks stopped running situation. We live out in the woods. When we ran out of everything else to eat, me and Nisha and Beckett and Bonnie Blue, we would roast up some mealworms and we would eat those. 100% we would do that in a compelling situation. And I think a lot of people in the comments are saying, yeah, if I was starving, I would eat bugs. And I think for many people, that's an appropriate response. At least you're being rational and saying, well, in this given situation, I would do that.
Yeah. And I think another point to make, like some of the comments that we got earlier when I said I would eat bugs, was like, great, more steak for me. That's literally true. On a global scale, we can't produce meat to feed everyone, like a lot of it. We can't have 8 billion people eating like Sean Baker. We just can't. Right. So if eating bugs is normalized, then some people choose to do it because, like, I'm happy to have a steak. But also, if you give me a good tarantula, I'm cool with that too. Then every tarantula I eat, there's more steak for you and more steak for the world. Like, so I honestly can enjoy both equally, and you don't need to enjoy both equally. But if there are people that do, like me and like people in 160 countries across the world, then let them do that, because then there's literally more steak for you.
Absolutely, and I'm fine with that. I'll take it. Elroy said he's eaten June bugs before at parties. You know what a June bug is? They smell terrible and they're huge. Oh, so I want to ask everybody watching this, what's the weirdest thing you've ever eaten? And I want you to be honest about this. Don't lie. And I'm going to go first. I'm a country boy. I'm a redneck. So I've eaten rattlesnake. I've eaten copperhead. I've eaten groundhog. I've eaten raccoon. I've eaten turtle. There's a soft shell turtle in the Tennessee River that's really delicious. I've eaten lots of weird things, but never growing up did I eat on purpose a bug or witness one of my relatives eating a bug. What's the weirdest thing you've eaten? I think you've already told us, but maybe there's even more weird things you've eaten, Nick Norwitz.
Me? I've eaten a lot of things. I used to travel a lot, and so anywhere I go, I have a rule. I will try literally any food that won't hurt me, as in like it won't cause me gastrointestinal distress or poison me. So everything from, just along the bug lines, tarantula, scorpion, cockroach, cricket, mealworm, a little bit higher up in the food chain, frog, duck's tongue, like whole baby octopus. They actually, in the niche market, they take baby octopus and they remove like kind of the brain cavity and they stick an egg yolk in there. It's actually really good.
Nice.
All sorts of weird things, but I genuinely enjoy it, and some of it tastes great and some of it does not taste great, but it's always kind of a fun adventure to try something new. So any organ meat you probably can imagine, I probably tried. Most of it I like, actually.
And I'm seeing some comments about the potential toxins, carcinogens, things in bugs. There is some research showing that some bugs contain tannins, hydrocyanides, oxalates. That is true in some cases. Depending on what the bugs ate in their diet and the environment they lived in, they can contain mercury, cadmium, toxins, pathogens, depending on how they were raised and what they were fed. That is absolutely true. But what people who advocate entomophagy are advocating is to raise them properly and feed them a clean diet so that they don't contain these things. What else have you found in digging into this subject, Nick?
Yeah, I think that there are people with allergies. You could talk about heavy metals. You could talk about mycotoxins, aflatoxins, pesticides. These are all legitimate concerns. And there is an issue with the pipeline with respect to production of safe insects. That said, that's an issue with the pipeline, not actually the insects themselves. You could make the same argument for any food. So let's talk about meat. Okay, you can have a tiniosolium tapeworm in undercooked pork. You can get neurocysticercosis, hydrocephalus seizures, and get Swiss cheese holes in your brain. Now, does that mean pork is bad for you? No. It means we just need to raise it in a way that makes sense for human consumption. Same with red meat. You could get E. coli. You could really make this argument for any food source. So, is there a problem with the production of insects in some places? Yes. Does that justify not talking about entomophagy or saying it's bad blanket? No. But yeah, there are concerns.
Yeah. And so Roxana, after my own heart, she wants to know what's the fat macro of bugs, because she's keto all the way, and that's very important.
Yeah.
I got you, Roxana. I'm right there with you. What's the fat content?
I can share tables with people. There are intense tables because there's, like you said, 2,000 different species that are consumed, and it varies. So I'll give you an example. Termites have 42% saturated fatty acids. Like, you can look at these tables, 22% MUFA. As a general rule of thumb, they kind of have the fat profile more of like chicken or pork, more so than beef. Some have kind of like a 1-to-1-to-1 saturated MUFA-PUFA content, although it really does vary, and it can be biased based on what you feed these animals. So if you feed them like rotting fish offal, they'll be high in EPA and DHA. So it can be biased, and again, it depends on how you're raising them. And what are cool about... Go ahead.
One of the good arguments for people who want to eat bugs, eating more bugs, would be that we could feed all of our food waste, of which there are billions of tons every year, and they could upcycle that because there are things that cows and pigs and chickens won't eat that bugs will still eat. If it gets bad enough, off enough, ruined enough, even the chickens and pigs won't eat it. But you could feed it to the bugs. The bugs could eat it, upcycle it, and then you would have access to that protein, that fat, and those vitamins and minerals if you chose to do that.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the most interesting things, the sustainability argument, specifically with respect to food waste. Like you mentioned, so 1.8 billion tons, not pounds, 1.8 billion tons of food is wasted each year, mostly plant matter. The pigs, the cows, they won't eat it. So either it's going to go into a landfill and generate carbon emissions, or you could upcycle it using bugs. The black soldier fly has been researched for this a lot. And so if you have black soldier fly with a very high organic matter to protein generation efficiency ratio, changing 1.8 billion tons of food waste into sustainable protein, either we can feed that to people who are undernourished, or we can feed it to your chickens or your pigs or your cows. It can become then animal feed. And then rather than having all this food waste, we actually generate a productive food cycle, even if that means it ends up, building the atoms in your cow.
Yes.
Still a good option.
Yeah. And I've got a good friend, Nick Ferguson, who is all about regenerative agriculture and regenerative ranching. And he raises black soldier flies to feed to his chickens and quails. He doesn't raise mealworms. He raises black soldier flies and feeds the larvae, and then turns the black soldier fly that eat all of his kitchen scraps. He turns those, then upcycles them into chicken eggs and quail eggs, which I think is a beautiful way to use this, because you're still kind of indirectly eating the bugs, because they turn that what would have been wasted food into nutritious eggs. And for all you guys watching who are just freaked out by this, like, this is all the more reason to really get your butt in gear and find a regenerative rancher and find a regenerative farmer who's not spraying pesticides and who's not using the CAFO model of raising livestock, and start to support them with your dollars. Because I promise you, if times get hard enough, if the recession gets deep enough, if the trucks stop running enough, you will eat the bugs, even if it's against your will, or you'll starve to death. I'm sorry. So get on it right now. As soon as this video is over, go find a regenerative rancher and start buying your beef from him and help him to expand and grow. Please do that, because I don't want to eat bugs. I want to eat steak and eggs. That's what I want to eat. I will eat bugs in a starvation situation, but I will not eat them by choice if I have another choice. And I think, is that how most of you guys feel as well? We have to be practical at some point and say, okay, if there's nothing to eat but bugs, dummy, if you get hungry enough, you're going to eat bugs. And that's fine. But what Nick is saying is they are not inherently toxic. I saw a tweet going around that they contain some kind of cosmocytotoxin or something. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. that no, and this guy said it's a very common myth, is that no mammals can eat bugs. No mammals can break down chitin and eat bugs. And that's actually a myth that's out there. It's absolutely untrue. We know there are hundreds, probably thousands of examples of other mammals that have all three copies of the chia gene, and they can absolutely break down chitin.
Yeah, there's a lot of myths going around on Twitter. I mean, there was one about I saw ectosteroids.
That's it. Ectosteroids.
Yeah. No. Oh, is that the tweet?
That's it. Yeah. It's like,
no, ectosteroids. They're the steroid hormones found in arthropods that regulate their development. And they actually have been used in sports performance as a supplement, showing significantly higher increases in muscle mass in humans in those participants given the ectosterone. The paper was, I'm trying to remember the author. I think it was like Iceman et al. Or something in some study in 2019. But yeah, I mean, it's given as a sports supplement to humans, and that's just a fabrication of fact.
Yeah. Kathleen says, nope, no way. She will not try it. What is it for you guys watching this right now? Is it the ick factor? Is it the fear of having an allergic reaction? Is it the fear that there's anti-nutrients and you just won't get any nutrition from the bugs? Or is it a religious fear? Which fear is it? And let's not even couch it as fear. Let's just say, what's your exact reason? Type it in a complete sentence in the comments. I want to see your reason. I will not eat bugs because of the following reason or reasons. And let's try to keep this conversation going, because for Joanne, it's the ick factor. Yeah, it's the ick factor for everybody. And so just imagine, just for a minute, step away from your current life and imagine if growing up, your grandmother had roasted mealworms in the oven and salted them and put some Redmond's seasoned salt on them and a little bit of bacon grease. And that was what you guys had every year as kind of a Thanksgiving appetizer. And then your mom continued that tradition. And you grew up, that was just normal in your house to have roasted mealworms on Thanksgiving morning. You realize that the ick factor wouldn't be there then. That would just be you'd be like, yeah, people eat bugs. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
Let's see if anybody got any questions. Ask us a question, and we'll take some questions now. Anything else you want to add to this? Oh, I know. I got one more question I want to ask everybody. If you had to choose from one of the following, and you either choose this or I shoot you with the shotgun. You've got to eat plant-based meat, or you've got to eat lab-grown meat, or you've got to eat some cricket powder baked up into some low-carb muffins. Which one do you pick? Interesting. I'm interested to see what the answers to that would be. Plant-based burger, Beyond Burger, or lab-grown meat, or some muffins, low-carb muffins made with cricket powder. Which one would you eat if you had to pick? What do you think the answer is going to be, Nick?
Me? Probably the low carb muffins. I think I'm an optimist here. For me, it's going to be the most whole food. You can just skip the powder. Just give me the damn cricket. I have no problem with it. But,
so how would you do it? So
the protein powder is actually becoming quite popular.
So would you only eat crickets as a powder, or how would you, if you had 200 crickets at your house right now, how would you prepare them? What would you do?
I probably just fry them up. Could be quite honest. A little chili, little lime, like chipolinas in Mexico. They're great. My friend,
leave the legs on?
Yeah, my friend Adrian. Adrian, Dr. Sotomoda, who's on Twitter with us. He used to go to Mexico, come back to Oxford with chipolinas, give them out to the lab. Everybody loved them. They were really good.
So you leave the legs on the cricket?
Yeah.
What about the antenna? You leave those on too?
I honestly don't really think about it. Whatever's there, I'll just eat.
So do they gut the crickets like you would gut a deer, or is the guts
dried out?
All of it.
I don't even think about it. I just eat whatever they send me, and I haven't gotten sick yet. So,
wow, interesting.
Not at least from bugs. I did eat undercooked chicken liver and got a Campylobacter jejuni infection. That wasn't fun.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, that was not fun.
Okay, give us your wrap up, Nick. What do you want everybody to take away from this conversation? And hint, it's not that you must eat the bugs. That's not what we're saying here.
Not at all. What I'd like people to take away is that there's a false equivalency between saying bugs are nutritious and sustainable protein that we probably should normalize as a practice, bug eating, entomophagy, and we need to take away your meat or meat is bad. Those are not the same thing. They're two different issues, and we need to treat them as two different issues. And also to separate the scientific arguments from the emotional reaction, the you factor, which I'm not saying is invalid. If that's your culture, then fine. But to be able to separate these things, and I think that's just a lesson we need to, a lesson that needs to guide us in general, because a lot of science, especially nutrition science, is guided by emotion and dogma. And that is just a problem blanket statement. And so this is just only one microcosm where I think people get a little bit dogmatic because of the emotions. So let's just try to separate those things and have a reasonable conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And my takeaway from this would be essentially the same thing. I want there to always be pasture-raised meat and eggs available for all of us. But currently, and so if you have a problem with the confinement feeding operations that currently is how the vast majority of beef and pork and chicken are raised in this country, you need to do something about that right now. You need to start supporting regenerative ranchers and farmers right now. Tomorrow morning, you need to find one. But in the meantime, what Nick is saying is there's no way at this moment in time that we can feed everybody with regeneratively raised beef. That there's too many people on the planet. We've kind of gotten ourselves into a bind, haven't we, Nick? Where our population has gotten so big that now we're kind of forced, at least for a while, to eat things that are less than optimal, whether that's wheat, rice, oats, and corn, or whether that's vegetable seed oils. Some people who can't afford better just currently can't do better, and that's sad. But there are people in the world that perhaps most of the viewers have never met who would love to have some wheat, rice, oats, and corn and some canola oil. They would love that because they're currently starving to death. And so for those people, I think if we were able to upscale the production of this insect model, at least to feed people who are on the verge of starvation. And then for those of us in the kind of the more, I don't even know how to phrase this without being insensitive now, but in the United States, the average person who's got a job and a career, you don't have to eat bugs. You're going to be able to afford better quality food than that. But some people can't afford that. And so rather than demonize this or try to act like, oh, this is absolutely unacceptable, we need to really kind of separate ourselves from this and go, wait a minute, this is not, nobody's going to force you to eat bugs. How many hundreds of millions of handguns and firearms are there in the United States? Nobody's ever going to come here and make us eat the bugs. That's not going to happen. Okay. But there are people who would love to have the bugs if they had access to them.
Yeah. You did say better quality food than bugs. Just keeping in mind, from a cultural standpoint, right. I don't actually think bugs are objectively
smart.
inferior.
He caught that. You see that? Out of that whole tirade, he caught that.
They're that inferior.
Yes. No, I totally get it.
My undergraduate thesis advisors beat verbal precision into me. So now every time, one of my huge pet peeves, and Dave teases me about this all the time, anybody says data as a singular, like this data, I get all enraged. But anyway, I can be nitpicky.
I love it.
But,
I love it. All right.
Yeah.
Nick,
do we have any more questions?
So much for doing this. Any closing thoughts? I've got Nick's his bio and his links down in the show notes. If any of you guys want to check out any of the other stuff Nick is working on, you can check that out. He's very active on Twitter. Nick believes 100% in a ketogenic diet and a carnivore diet. He has no qualms with that. Nick Norwitz does not want you to eat the bugs, but he does want you to understand that it is a viable option. It offers seemingly pretty good nutrition, and it is not part of the New World Order if you decide that you want to eat a few crickets or mealworms every now and then.
Yeah, it's just an option for some people. So
just an option.
For sure. And right, I know I'm going to get myself into a little trouble with this video, but we'll see what the fallout is. Putting myself on the cross for this one. But thank you so much for the conversation. It was fun.
Absolutely, brother. And you're welcome back anytime. And you guys, Nick he's not the bad guy. He's the good guy. Okay. But he's an intellectual good guy, which means he actually thinks deeply about things that most people don't think about very deeply. And sometimes those things come out of an intellectual person's mouth. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. But it is what it is. And the truth is what it is, whether you like it or not. All right, Nick Norwitz, thank you so much, my brother. I'll see you next time.
See you next time.